April 30th, 2009. We are in Bangkok, Thailand. And we've been working on this family tree. And thought it'd be fun to do a little recollection of family members. So this is Dennis Stone, and I'm here with my mother, Lola Stone. And I thought we could start with your father's side, the Solomon.
All right.
And maybe, what do you remember about here's your grandfather Louis and your grandmother Johanna Feinstein.
We'll start with the grandparents. Our grandparents were Orthodox Jews, and when we were living at Long Island, we'd get on, come into Penn Station, and catch the train to Asbury Park, which was always a beach resort. There, we'd go to visit our grandparents. Now our grandfather used to take us to shul, he called it, which literally is school, but it also means the temple. And that's where I heard, men and women sitting separately and all the Orthodox thing. We went at time to celebrate Pesach, which is the Passover, and that was always fun for us kids, because they would give us Mogen David but it was always a memorable thing. And then it was also my birthday always at that time. So my Aunt Bessie, one of their children, would always sneak me up. She had an apartment on the top floor. It was an old-fashioned Victorian house surrounded by porches all the way around. And she'd sneak me up to her apartment, which was being redone, remodernized. And it must have been after she was maybe divorced or her husband died, I don't remember. But there she would always give me candy for my birthday and beg me, please don't tell her folks.
This is in Asbury Park.
And in the water.
Nice.
Not that we didn't have closer beaches, but it was a good chance to visit and fun. I didn't tell you, we went in the old, what we call the choo-choo trains, and with open windows, and by the time I got there, I always had my head out of the window. Lynn used to do that driving in cars before air conditioning. By the time I got to their home, I was black, completely covered with soot. Anyway, so that was always memorable. And then I'd like to go on and talk about some of the other children in the family. I mentioned Bessie. Bessie was a postmistress, and that was her job. And anyway, she had 2 children eventually. I don't remember.
Charles and Howard, according to our tree.
Yeah, Charles and Howard. Anyway,
shall we scoot over?
so let's go over to Uncle Morris, who lived near where we live in Far Rockaway. Now, Uncle Morris, during the war, worked on ships. He was maybe a riveter or some kind of what kind of job do you call that? Blue-collar worker. But then after the war, it was hard for him, and he used to ask my father to lend him money, and my father was very uppity. important, which I'm glad he did. And we never wanted for anything. We never had money or allowances, but neither did any of our friends, so we were okay. So Uncle Morris, poor thing, my mother would feel sorry for him because he was out of a job, and there were no jobs. People were out of jobs. She would sneak him some household money, and my father was not very nice to him, I regret. But he was very happy-go-lucky. He married a very interesting woman, Lillian, who was psychic. My father used to consult her on many things.
Really?
Now, she would never tell me anything because she said, too close to family. But I brought her girlfriend. Sure enough, years later, my friend Joan painted a picture that looked like a Renoir, but never pursued it. She was too lazy. So she told people things that came true.
That's lovely.
Let's see, who else? But anyway, she was very psychic. The seventh child born under a veil, they call a call, C-A-U-L.
Who are you talking about now?
That was Lillian,
Oh, Lily.
who was married by marriage.
So did Meyer ever get married?
I never saw Maya.
Oh, you never
He
saw
died
him?
before.
And Molly?
And then Molly, I
remember
never
that?
knew she died before I was
Oh,
born.
really? Okay.
Uh-huh. And
That doesn't, I think we need to fix this, because it says she was born in 1910. That doesn't sound right.
no, that was probably too late. She might have died then, I don't know.
That doesn't sound right. Okay.
Okay, now should we go to,
Then there was the Erna.
oh, Erna, Aunt Erna. We knew her, she lived in Chicago, and I'd go to visit her, and I knew her kids.
Shulkins. Oh, yeah, I remember Irv and Viola and
Yeah.
their daughters.
Irving was in the Air Force like
Like Richard.
Richard,
Oh, that's right.
like my brother Richard. He was also a colonel, and he come to Irving, Arthur, my mother and I sat at a little table and we held on our hands and we asked certain questions. And the answer comes back, I know thy thoughts. When I heard that, I ran up to my room, closed the door, I said, I'm never going to do that again. I was petrified.
You did that with who? With
With
Erna?
cousin Irving,
Irving. Okay.
my brother Arthur, my mother, and me. That was something I scared me with. We used to do Ouija boards, but then found out they were dangerous, so we dropped that. And we weren't the only ones. Everybody, it was a vogue. The
What else
Ouija
do you remember about Erna?
And Erna, she was always very open and friendly and easy to get along with. Much more
You
often.
talked about Bessie.
So we were much closer to Mother's family
All right, let's
than
scoot
to
over.
Dad.
Let's scoot over
So
to the.
Mother was the youngest child, and Aunt Ada was the oldest of that batch, but by grandmother by a former marriage, and I don't know how that ended up. He died, I suppose. Had a son, Joseph, and a daughter, whose name I don't know, who lives in Boston. Okay, now, Uncle Joe, we loved him because he always had peppermints in his pocket. And he'd always give us those lifesaver peppermints with a hole in the middle. We thought was great. And he ran a business
Joe Goodstein, here, way
Yeah,
at the
Joe.
end here.
So Uncle Joe had a beautiful shop on Madison Avenue where he sold quilts and things. And Arthur, high school or afterwards, went to work for him and would earn some money. And then, anyway, Uncle Joe, I remember one year, he was very generous to Richard and got him a fire engine, which was a dream of little Richard's life, that fire engine. And Richard, of course, always was playing airplanes from babyhood on, paper airplanes. Then he used to put together balsa Harriet. She was an enormous woman who would, I don't think they ever had any children. Uncle Joe had children by a former wife who died.
Oh.
Who
So
died.
this Larry and Harold on
Yeah,
here,
so
they're not the children of Harriet.
No, he had a couple of boys who lived on Long Island that I knew.
Okay, we have to correct this. Okay.
And now,
How about this daughter in Boston and aunt?
yeah, there's a daughter in Boston.
But we don't know much.
One time, a couple came from Boston. His name was Forrest Green, and his wife's name was Frances. They came to visit Cousin Florence, and I met them. And brothers,
Okay, let's
sisters.
move over. Hang on.
Let's go over to Uncle Herman. Uncle Herman was a very successful lawyer. His most famous case, got him in all the newspapers, was Count Psalm. I forget how it's spelled, but anyway, a count who had a sensational divorce. And that put Uncle Herman up into the wealth and notoriety and everything.
Oh.
But he was a very lovely man. He would teach Arthur and I all kinds of mathematical tricks with numbers. Somehow I went along, though I never could relate much to numbers, having had the bad teachers at arithmetic. So I used to stay in
Yes.
So I would stay weekends
That's
and go to
great.
Columbia proms and other nightclubs, etc.
Yeah, some of these folks are still around, isn't Betty Jane Goodstein?
So Betty Jane-
Schechter.
Yeah.
She married Ed Schechter.
So anyway, at Aunt Anna's, they always had, Aunt Nancy, who was a great beauty. It seemed very cold, but she really wasn't after I got to know her. She was, anyway, of course her home was impeccably run, and she had waitresses at the table. That's where I learned real etiquette, which was and then, not every weekend, but lots of weekends. And when I was younger, I wore beautiful clothes that Alice, who was 2 years older, had outgrown. So I'd have these beautiful woolen tartan skirts, and finally Grandma John said, no, stop it. And of course I was upset, but my mother understood that it would be not good for me when I was older to wear clothes that my cousin had worn. But when I was a kid, I enjoyed it. So I always had beautiful clothes, despite depressions. And then my mother, later on teens, my mother sewed beautifully. I would just make a drawing and she could design Anyway, always attracted to Asia. Okay, now let's see, whom else I want to talk
Yeah,
about.
let's go. Keep
Okay,
going here.
mother's, Aunt Ada was the oldest of that batch.
There they are.
Ada was,
and Murphy.
okay. So Ada and her father came to America before the rest of the family because my mother was just born. Until she was almost 2, they waited to come and follow Louis, the husband, and Ada. So Ada really never went to school because she didn't know the language. She was already 10, so she had a lot of practical knowledge. She learned, she was very smart. And turned out to be a very famous beauty.
They were right there.
But Aunt Ada was very possessive, so I never got too close. I didn't want to feel possessed by anyone. Okay.
And Herman? Uncle Herman.
Well, I talked about, Herman was the second youngest. Then there-
Her husband. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry, Murphy. I got it wrong. Murphy.
Well, I'd rather not talk about him. He was kind of a playboy type.
Oh, really?
He had bachelor friends and he'd hang around with them, and Ada had a lot of trouble with him. And that's enough said.
Okay.
We had wonderful family friends like Mark. Turned into a light.
You're talking about Murphy's friend or
Murphy's friend,
Oh.
Mark Dix. He made a fortune, sold his business, or donated to his workers, and quit at age 40. And he was the playboy, the handsome, always wore Russian shirts. And he used to give me books on the Soviet because he thought this was a great experiment. So I used to read about Soviet experiment.
Okay, so here's a thought. So, cousin Florence was the
Oh,
daughter
of Ada.
of Murphy and Ada. Murphy was a playboy and she was a playgirl, wasn't she?
Whoa, Florence, I could go on and write a book about it. But all I can do is say,
Kiss.
at age 17 to the country clubs. We danced under the stars. It was lovely. She'd bring her retinue. She never traveled alone. She always had at least 3 or 4 male escorts, and they would cut in. Their purpose in coming was to make sure I was safe. I was chaperone. I didn't get into trouble. So one of the men would always cut in on me while I was dancing, and to make sure everything was right. So I didn't resent it. It was kind of fun. Okay, but she was quite notorious. She slept with her best friends' husbands and remained best friends with a woman who never knew.
Wow.
He was killed not in action, but by diving into a pool that was too shallow, but it broke his neck and died. And it was very sad. He and Bob, my first husband, Bob Morton, owned a sailboat called Zephyas, the swordfish, a Greek name, and it was a yawl. It was a something converted yawl, and it was 35 feet long. It was a beautiful ship. We loved it. We went sailing over to Jersey Shore and all up and down the Atlantic around Long Island. I loved it. devotion from men like you wouldn't believe, and women. Okay, Florence was very beautiful, and she always lied about her age, of course, making herself younger. And she and her sister Violet never got on. There was always that jealousy and rivalry between the two, which seemed to last most of their life. And I loved them both, and I felt bad about that. But that's so often the case with sisters.
What do you recall about Violet?
Well, before we get in Violet, Florence, I want to tell how she, here's her typical diet. She would and wait,
That's nice.
salad, steak, and chocolate cake,
And
always accompanied by scotch. And late afternoon, even when I lived in Honolulu, I'd go visit him. Late afternoon, around 3:30 or 4, we had to start putting out cocktail glasses and bring out some whiskey or wine or something. We never knew what men were going to show up.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes our husbands or friends, sometimes bachelors, or even a hairdresser who was gay. They would all come. Everybody loved Florence.
It was a party every afternoon.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh yeah. And then she and the man next door, a lovely English enough about
You
Florence.
could write a book.
Now, her sister Violet was the mother of my dear cousin Louise, who was very close to me. She's 10 years younger than I. Now, Violet was a different kind of a person. She was creative. She and her husband were childhood sweethearts, and they lived together and worked together in complete harmony their whole life.
Sidney
Devoted.
Samuels. Sidney Samuels.
Samuels was rather a cool man, and she was very warm, but they were lovely people, and they were always into boats. Boats. In fact, I used to go ski joring, we called it, in the water. Aquaplaning, we called it. Always involved with boats, and I was always involved with them with the boats, loved it. And then they graduated to bigger and bigger boats. So eventually Louise inherited that boat until very recently when she donated it to a maritime museum.
The VG or something like that?
The VG.
Right, yeah.
Happened to be in Stuart, Florida, where later I went to sell just by coincidence, if there is such a thing as coincidence. Synchronicity. Anyway, so Louise and I are very close always. Now, who else is there? Louise had a very happy marriage with Bud Schindler, and 2 children. And not too much about him. Pleasant guy, not very dynamic, kind of quiet, agreeable kind of guy. And Ada always demanded certain things of our kids, and they all catered to her. That was why I stayed away. She would demand they all had to be there Thanksgiving no matter what, and things like that. So that turned me off, even though she and I lived across the street from each other at one point, downtown in Manhattan, when I lived on West 16th Street, where Lynn was born. So.
But you wouldn't cross the street on Thanksgiving.
No, but
Okay.
let me see. Who else was in my mother's family? Willie Goodstein was a doll. We loved him. He was the most similar to my mother in looks, in personality, warm, loving. We just adored him. And he would show us how to draw horses. He could do it in a few lines so gracefully. But my mother was the artist, but he also had art talent. I forget what his profession was. He lived in Pittsburgh and had a very unhappy marriage.
To Blanche?
Yeah, who was very domineering. And finally, she would never divorce him, but finally he found this lovely lady named Pat with whom he lived, companion. Meanwhile, he had two daughters. One of them was Patsy Toleris, who married someone named Harry. She was one we always called Flossie Davis. That Davis was Manny Davis, who was the first batch of Hollywood cartoonists. We used to see his name on the screen. We'd go to movies. He was very well known. And so we'd see them on occasion. They didn't seem to live in New York. I don't know, maybe they were in Pennsylvania. But we'd see them on occasion. Let's see, that's it. I think I covered everybody in my... Oh, I did mention one of Uncle Junior's. That must have been grandmother, Johanna's brother.
Okay, yeah.
But that generation was Tante Emma. Tante Emma lived in Newark, New Jersey, and she had 3 girls. The oldest one was fairly attractive. The other 2 were we thought, ugly. Fortunately, our family, everybody was pretty good looking, if I have to say so. But that was the only ones that weren't. But they were lovely, and they'd come all the way from Jersey to visit us in Long Island. Oh, meanwhile, while we lived in Long Island, before I forget Flossie, Florence, she'd come with her entourage every Sunday morning with headaches because they'd been up drinking all the night before. And I learned how to
And your grandmother's sister.
Oh, yeah.
And there
Yeah,
was
Julius
Julius and Laura.
Now, Laura, I told you this story.
Laura was the one who lived in Bohemia, right?
Yeah. I don't
You
want
never
to-
met
That's a long story, no.
You never met her. And Julius, did you meet?
No. Let me see.
Julius
Julius,
Ginsburg?
yeah, he would come around all the time. Must have lived in New York. He had the glass eye.
Oh, right, okay, you mentioned him.
That's all I remember about
You
Julius.
didn't say much about your grandmother.
Mhm.
Your grandmother, Johanna Ginsburg.
Oh, yeah. She, when you think of the courage of that woman, came to America with her husband, and they were in some business.
This is the previous husband, the first husband, right? She had 2 husbands?
No.
He died in 1915.
1950.
Okay, so you never met him. But do you remember your grandmother, Johanna?
Yes, she
Ginsburg?
lived with us until
Oh,
I was 12 years old, and I had a friend. We lived in 2 places in Far Rockaway. For my first place, which was a couple of blocks away, I had a neighbor named Adrian Landy, who lived in a big mansion on the corner. She and I were very close. Her father was in the importing glamorous lingerie, all silk hand embroidered from Puerto Rico. And I, as a little kid, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, would be brought gifts of these gorgeous panties, as anything. You know, we had enough to eat, had anything we wanted. We didn't want anything in those days. We were grateful and happy and went bike riding and had lots of sports, ice skating and roller skating and horseback riding. I mean, I didn't miss anything.
Nice.
Now let's see. Oh, so one time I was sent to Adrian's. I was 12 years old for the weekend. Oh, well, that was fun.
Who?
My friend Adrian,
Okay.
that I was a close friend with, even though she lived, 3-4 blocks away. And when I came back, grandmother was gone. And the mystery is, no one told us anything. I inquired for my oldest cousin, that was Jean Singer, who has now passed away. She never knew what happened. All I knew is that I inherited her bedroom, and the boys had my bedroom that was in the back of the house. So it's a mystery to this day. Nobody knows what happened to
You could
her.
probably find her death certificate somewhere and maybe
Maybe,
find some hints.
maybe.
There's a mystery.
You seem to be
There's
able
a
to.
family mystery.
There's a family mystery. Now, who else can we talk about? I don't know. I think I talked about everybody. Oh, about Dad, was there one more thing I want to tell you? Yeah, everybody knows the story about how he was sent at age 15, maybe 9,000 miles down to Johannesburg, South Africa. Age 15, and he arrived in America. He must have arrived in America before World War I started, 1914, because nothing was moving, no boats or anything.
Oh, good
It
point.
was a worldwide war. So he must have arrived 1912,
We're good.
30, or
We
13.
can look for immigration records.
And he was,
Good.
yeah, it could only be about 22 or something. Oh, he came, he was a perfect Englishman, very handsome, British accent, played violin, very cultured, always had good books, wonderful books, Shakespeare, all these were there, and of course as a teenager, he was very uptight. But if he'd go to a wedding or big family gather, he would have a few drinks, which he never did. There was a man who should have drank. He never drank. At parties, he was with them all drinking. And he would do imitations of a famous Sir Harry Lauder, a Scotsman, and he would sing songs with a Scottish accent. He would be the life of the party.
But back home,
Back home, he was a rigid disciplinarian. Fortunately, he traveled almost half a year, and mother was the other way. We were brought up half strict, half lenient. So it's kind of a strange thing. Arthur and I ate it all up. Richard was a little younger then. Let's see
what stories can you tell about your brothers?
Yeah. Brother Arthur is practically a twin to me. He's a year and a half younger. But even when we were separated, most of our adult lives, we lived at least 3,000 miles away here on the West Coast, me on the East Coast. And we would always know the same poems, read the same books. It was like twins. I mean, astounding. He and I were so similar. Whereas Richard was quite different. He was only interested in planes and limited interest. I think he even enjoyed the war, being a fighter pilot. So Richard was simpler, and Arthur and I were always into the being creative, and Arthur could do anything. Nothing. I studied piano, forgot how to play. He never studied. He can play piano beautifully. He can do first sculpture he ever made look like a masterpiece. Anything he touched, he did beautifully. So, I mean, that's Arthur. Also warm and loving. He'd give you the shirt off his back, whereas Richard was tight as a drum, even to his own daughter. Okay, I hope this is confidential. I forgot to mention Uncle Herman. Alice, closer to my age, and Betty was younger. Jean was brilliant. She won all kinds of degrees, like summa cum laude, and I forget which famous girls' college she went to, but she became a writer. She would write for Atlantic Monthly and all intellectual magazines. She married a man named Suma Singer, and an attractive-looking man. I met him, I think, only once. He died suddenly by a heart attack, and he was 39, and she was left with raising 3 boys.
Max, Lewis,
Three boys.
and a third son. We don't know
And
his name.
Lewis, now one of them came back, but I forget. Now, I forget, Max was the father. Oh,
There's
Max was the father of Alex Singer. Now, they were living in Israel, and he fought in the 1967 war and was killed on his 24th birthday, on his birthday. Great tragedy. He was already a famous artist, and he was killed. It was a great tragedy. Now, he had a cousin or a brother named Benji, whom I met. Louis, Bob and I took a trip to Jerusalem,
I remember that,
to
yeah.
Israel, and visited her in Jerusalem. And I think this was in the late 1980s. And she took us around. She wasn't too well then. We had what she called a Saba. That was the Friday night special dinner, and Bob and I was there. And Benji, a grandson. Now Benji came from Tel Aviv and ran a restaurant, so we were going to Tel Aviv. And we didn't get to see him again, unfortunately. We went to his restaurant, which was an enormous restaurant, and the food, one thing about this, I think because the Jews have been so deprived, and here they had everything, they grew it themselves, they just had to have enormous portions, symbolic, I guess. But anyway, since Ari, who is the son of David Solomon, is now in Israel, I've asked him
Who started this
periodically,
tree, by the way? We
who started
thank
this,
Ari for
this
that.
tree, for which we're all grateful. I've been wanting him to look up Benji Singer, who shouldn't be that hard to find, having a big
restaurant, right.
successful, enormous successful restaurant. So he'll find them eventually. He would take us hiking every Sunday. Now, in those days, people worked on Saturday, half a day. We lived on Long Island. We had to take that train in and out, and never got home till late lunch, and had the rest of that was his only day off. Sunday, we'd always, in the summer, we'd hike to the beach, long, long walks, maybe 3 miles for kids and everything. But weekends, we'd go up Morningside Heights, living in New York, 157th Street on the west side. We'd go up to Morningside Heights, look down at the Yankee Stadium, and see these little tiny figures playing baseball. That was fun. And he would Mr. Brenner, that's all the name I remember.
Well, because
So-
Brenner was the
Something in,
maiden name of his grandmother.
yeah, well, see, I didn't know that.
Sylvia Feinstein was Sylvia Brenner.
Now, something about you have Bessie of Pelongan, I'll tell you about her. She was not my father's grandmother. She was a great-great-grandmother, or even back further. Now, Pelongan, which I only found out recently, is south of Riga, like Libau, where Mother was born, along the Baltic Sea. They were seaside resorts, and amber washed up all the time in that Baltic Sea. So anyway, Pelongan. So Pelongan was a beach resort, but in the days when Bessie of Pelongan lived there, it must have been a little tiny rustic place. She was known as the wise woman of the town. She lived to 105, and she was a healer. Who knows, maybe psychic. So my father just told me that, which is very little, because when I asked him to tell me something about Latvia, or the language, what did it sound like, or anything about it, any question, no, it's not important, you're Americans. That's unimportant. About the past out of him was Dennis. Dennis, at age 12, we went down to see our father
St. Pete.
my father down in St. Pete, Petersburg, Florida. And in the garage was this mysterious-looking pirate chest. And so Dennis asked about it. Well, my father opened it for him, and there were gorgeous charcoal drawings of nudes that was so beautiful. And there was, what other things were in there? Oh, all kinds of old photographs. There was a gorgeous photograph. My father's handsome man with his violet blue eyes, black hair, playing violin and in an orchestra. I mean, all these talents this man had. And he was frustrated because he couldn't come and get a job as a musician at age 23. Just arrived, didn't know the New York. He came because his family had moved to Jersey to escape the Russian pogroms that were going on at that period in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, where the Jews were all congregated, according to the Tsar. So anyway, that's why his mother had sent him down to her father in South Africa, because they would take the oldest boy of the family, 15, 16 up, and send them into the Tsar Diabetes in Rome and got sunstroke somewhere along the way down. How long it took must have been
Wow.
months.
And he was how
How he
old?
survived
He was
with
15,
not
16.
knowing languages. I mean, it's
Hmm.
all a mystery. He would never go into detail. But anyway, so Dennis was able to unlock the key to a very fascinating history.
Literally unlock the key.
Because he
to the
wouldn't-
trunk.
He wouldn't tell us, but he would tell Dennis. That by then he was older and retired, more relaxed. And then he was into his second marriage with Tessie, who knew, lovely lady who knew just how to handle him. And he was docile, a different person completely.
Yeah, yeah, well, we know she's at least your great-grandmother, maybe.
So what
even
her
more.
last name was, I don't know. I don't know anything about her.
How about on the Goodstein,
What?
the Goodstein side, there was, it's funny, both pairs of grandparents were named
Johanna
Louis
and Johanna.
and Johanna.
I suppose it was common names in those
I
days.
guess so. We don't know, we need to research more about the Goodsteins, because
Oh,
we
all I
only
know
have,
is that Grandpa Solomon told me his side of the family, way back, came from Portugal.
oh.
Which
that's
means, when 1492, when Columbus, who was suspected to be Jewish, in fact, there was so that year the Jews were expelled from
Portugal.
Iberia,
Spain.
yeah.
They'd been 500 years completely living with the Muslims in complete harmony, with the native Spanish, the Celts, the native Spanish, harmony. But they got too wealthy and too powerful, and they were thrown out. Once they did that, Spain was the richest country in Europe, became almost the poorest. But that's another story. So where did these people go? They stayed in Portugal, but somehow within 100 or less than 100 years, Portugal said, no, we don't want you. Go. Migrated way up north to Latvia. Others scattered, they went to Morocco, they went here, they went all over the world. That was the diaspora, when they were all dispersed.
Morocco?
Yeah? Oh yeah, Morocco has a big branch of
Oh,
Jews.
interesting.
There's no place on earth, as far as China, I'm sure they even got to America in ancient days before Columbus. Whatever, they were always, and that might have been the mission of the Jews. In fact, a psychic had told me, I asked her, she took one day to think it over and go into whatever she did. She said the Jewish race was sent from another planet to bring up the level of intelligence, but she said eventually they fell under the spell of matter. Grandfather, grandmother,
Connection.
in their ancestry.
And the Goodsteins came from where?
Who?
The Goodsteins.
Um,
Your
Yeah,
mom's.
well, I talked about Grandmother Goodsey. She was started very brave. Came to America. From
Riga,
No,
okay.
from Libau.
Libau, okay,
Latvia.
that's also part of
And-
Latvia.
And they came in the worst possible time, the famous storm of 1888, which was the coldest. The Hudson River froze completely. But here they came from a cold climate, but what a cold reception they got. Poor things. And God knows how they came on these boats. Had a wealthy brother who must have supported them or got them started, but the father, Louis, died, and so, Louis Goodstein. And so grandmother took over, as I said, started this mattress business and did very well. Very successful woman. Very courageous. Should be so grateful to our ancestors.
Indeed.
To have come under the worst circumstances from being persecuted to come and find
Difficult
respite.
travel to America as immigrants
In those days,
and
travel
be as
was
successful as they were here in the new country.
said she was born in Grodno, and I looked it up, and it was on the border of Lithuania and Russia proper. So at one time it was Russia, and another time it was Lithuania. But that means the family must have lived there and then moved, by the time the rest of the children were born, to Libau. Now Libau is a name no longer used because German had a strong influence in that area. German was a cultural capital of Europe. And so everybody knew German. My grandmother would talk German and English. Anyway, so I wanted to take a train down to where? To Latvia. We were told by the Soviets it was 4-hour trip. We got there, it was 8 hours, and we didn't have all that time. We had to be in Russia proper, St. Petersburg, at a certain date because we had a visa for that date. So Bob and I never got there, even though his family came from there too. Now, talking about Bob's family, I remember Aunt Anna. Bob would always call her Aunt Anna, who was a little bit erotic, emotional, and had a great effect. Secretary to David Bluestein, and when his first wife died, I don't think he'd ever been married.
I don't recall.
Wait, I don't think he'd ever been married. Anyway, he married his secretary, who was much younger than he. So she was about 18 or 19 when they married, and I have no idea how old he was. But
Well, he was born in 1874. So he was 21 years younger. Older, I'm sorry. She was 21 years younger than he was.
So there was quite an age difference. And then she had these 2 children, and when Bob was his sister, who was Aunt Atana, married to
Joseph Jaffe.
Joseph Jaffe.
Yeah, there.
And they were very well off and lived in a mansion.
He was a lawyer, right? That's
Yeah,
what I
He
understand.
was a lawyer. I know he used to help Bob after his father died with the fur business. He knew nothing about business, and the business disintegrated. Bob was off in MIT, came back, take care of the fur and ginseng business, but he was no businessman, he was a young kid. And so the business went down, down, down. So Bob had some rough times. But anyway, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. By the time I met him, it turned into a wooden toothpick. So Bob up in a closet if they did, and all kinds of horrible things. So he turned inward, became very introspective, and remained that way. The only time he opened up, I think, was he had courage enough to ask somebody that he knew, whom he knew, I knew, to introduce us down on the beach one day, and that's how we met. And that was when he made up his mind I was his destiny, and it took me 20 years to realize he was right.
Do you ever remember any of his other aunts or uncles? For example, there was
Oh yes,
Haskell, Corenthal, Meyer. Tilly?
where are you?
Tilly Corenthal?
No, I
She-
forget her
no,
name,
she-
but that wasn't it. She was a Corinth.
There was well, then Charles married Sylvia.
I don't remember her name, but she
Um,
was a delightful lady, and she really liked Dennis, didn't she? And I think she kept in touch, or you wrote
Is
to
it
her.
on the Frida side of the family or on David's side?
On
Bluesteins or
I know,
Corenthals?
no, on the Corinthal side. She was a Corinthal, and they lived in it. Was it down in Atlanta, somewhere down south? Charleston, I think Charleston. Was that Virginia, West
Oh, you're
Virginia?
talking about Reba?
What was it? And warm and friendly, really lovely. She was on Bob Stone's mother's side. I forget whether she was a sister.
Did I ever meet her? I know I got a letter from her.
I thought you had it,
Maybe
but maybe
so.
you were very, very young. Yeah, you might have met her when you were very, very young.
Now, George Jaffe, the son of Anna
Oh, yeah,
and
George.
Joseph, he lived on Long Island. We saw him
Yeah.
regularly.
Well, George was very, what's the word, kind of hard to know, not very responsive. I mean, he seemed stupid, but I suppose he wasn't. Finally, he never married. Finally, he met a widow with 2 children.
The blonde, right? Stamp collecting.
Oh, that was interesting.
Yeah.
And so we'd see them on occasion.
Well,
His
and
birthday was the
didn't Aunt
4th of
Anna-
July.
Didn't Aunt Anna live in Huntington for a while? I remember they had
No.
well,
They
my
had
dad and I would go see her on Sunday afternoons, and she'd leave
I forget where
candy and a bright, shiny quarter out for me.
was that in
She
Huntington?
and
I forgot where she
I think
was.
briefly, or at some point, she lived
Yeah,
near us.
somewhere near us. I
Yeah.
forget where they lived.
So I remember her.
Oh yeah, they were pleased with. They had no grandchildren. You were the closest that they ever could have.
Oh no, wait a second. Rebo was on my named Reba Cohen Bluestein.
Oh, I'm
She
sorry.
married Charles Cohen, and yeah, we did.
So Reba was on the father's side.
Right, and I'm in touch with one of her daughters right now. And there's another Bluestein called Louis. And a lot of the Bluesteins were living in
Louis.
West Virginia.
Louis was living in the.
Charleston.
He was a very strange uncle. He lived. They had a big property in Woodsburg, which is near Woodmere and Cedarhurst in Long Island. Beautiful property.
No, Louis Bluestein?
Um,
So I thought most of the Bluestein brothers were living in Charleston, West Virginia.
anyway, I don't know whose brother he
Okay,
was,
okay.
but he lived in a
Joseph Jaffe.
Yeah,
owned it, I think.
Jaffe's owned it, but it fell to other hands. It still stands there. One time visiting Louise,
Hmm.
cousin Louise, she took me to see it. It's called a Stone Cottage, and this Louis lived there on occasion, and then he'd wander off. He was a bachelor, and he'd appear and disappear, and that's all I know about that character.
Hmm. And
Anyone else?
we're trying to trace back to see where the Bluesteins came from. David said he was born in a town called Triski.
I'm
And
not sure.
there's a Triski in Lithuania. And there's another Triski in Estonia. So we're working to see where